So the first question is, what do we mean by metadata? Well, an Oracle database isn't just a store of data files. It includes information about all those different objects in your system, which define the semantics and operation of the database. I'm talking about things like the table definitions and how they're structured, and the objects that relate to tables like triggers and constraints and statistics and so on, but also other non-table objects such as your PL SQL packages, your users, your grants, roles, privileges, even audit policies have information stored in the data dictionary that tells us how they work and how to move them in and out of a database. The relationship between metadata can be a hierarchical one, like you see here with tables, for example. A table might have an index attached to it. It might have constraints or triggers or statistics associated with it. And all of those are kind of defined under a tree of information in what we call an object path. So that's how we define the access to each kind of metadata. If you're wondering about what all these object paths are, we actually have some system views that you can access to get a full list of every kind of metadata that you can access using the metadata API. Now, that list of information will vary based on whether you're doing a full database export or import, a schema job, or just working on a few tables. Because, for example, audit policies only exist at the full database level, not at the table level. So we can query those views, and you can get a list of the literally hundreds of object paths that are available for each kind of export or import. And that can be important when you want to include or exclude specific objects from your job. And we'll get more into how to use include and exclude later when we talk about best practices and some advanced techniques. But know that that's why you need to know those object paths, so that you can be very precise, or maybe less precise if you want, about including and excluding metadata objects. So up to 21C, include and exclude for data pump were mutually exclusive. That means you could either exclude certain types of objects, which means that the data pump job will export or import everything except for those objects that you excluded. Or you could include objects, which means that the data pump job would work only on those objects that you included. Well, starting with 21C, you can now combine include and exclude in the same job. And the way that will work is that we first process the include. So you gather the list of different object types that you're going to want to work on, whether it's tables, indexes, constraints, and whatever. And then from that, you could exclude certain types, like you could include tables, but then exclude any tables that start with a particular string in their name. So it becomes even more powerful starting with 21C. Now, some metadata does have dependencies, and there might be relationships that aren't obvious to you. So I'll just touch on a little bit of that here. When we talk about dependencies, what we mean is that for something like a table, if you exclude the table, you will also exclude any objects that relate to that table, your indexes, triggers, constraints, grants on that table, and so on. And there are other ways that this comes into play as well. For example, if you exclude an index, you'll exclude the index statistics for that index, not necessarily the table statistics for the table itself, though. And one other thing I just want to mention is that some types of metadata are maybe different than you might expect. For example, primary keys in the Oracle database are implemented as unique indexes. However, they're treated as table objects, as a constraint on the table, not as an index themselves.